Mizmor David, Adonai roi lo echsar, Binot sheyer bitzeni al memenuchot yanachaleni, Nafshi shovev, Yanacheni v'magle tzedek l'ma'an shemo, Gam ki helech b'geitz ha'mavet, Lo hirara ki ata imadi, Shiftecha u'mishantecha hema yanachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorirai. Dishanta vashamen roshi kosir vaya. Achto v'chesed yerdifuni koyamei chayai v'shaveti b'beit Adonai le'orech yamim. Dear friends, I've chanted for you the words of our 23rd Psalm. In these moments when hearts are breaking, when our eyes are filled with tears, when we are in need of strength, we often take a moment and turn to the psalmist in search of solace and comfort. And so I invite those of you who wish to join me to recite with me now the words of our 23rd Psalm as we say together, The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember her. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember her. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we will remember her. In the blueness of sky and in the warmth of summer, we will remember her. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember her. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember her. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember her. So long as we live, she too will live, for she is now a part of us, as we remember Roslyn Lubell. To her sons, Art, Jeff, Paul, also to Alice, and to her grandchildren, Sarah and Dan, Austin, Adam, Joshua, Zachary, and Jessica, to her great-granddaughter, Lydia, to her sister-in-law, Elaine, and to all the members of the family, and to so many dear, cherished friends, those of you who are able to join us in person, and to those of you who join us via live stream today. We welcome all of you in this moment. Today we join our hearts together as we remember, but also as we celebrate the life of your beloved Roz. Our sages in their wisdom have taught us that birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey from childhood to maturity and from youth to age. from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then, perhaps, to wisdom, from weakness to strength, or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness, and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, and from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, from grief to understanding, and from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred journey, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. Roslyn's journey of more than 92 years began in Brooklyn. Roz was born on October 8, 1929, to Joseph and Anna Rosenberg. She was the youngest of the three Rosenberg children, and together with her siblings, Norman and Claire, both of blessed memory, she grew up in a warm and loving home, a kosher home, a home where Jewish traditions and practices were so important and held such great meaning. Roz, Claire, and Norman were blessed with an enormous extended family. There were so many aunts and uncles and cousins, and for the most part, they all lived together, or at least near each other. Their family's home was a two-family house located in Brooklyn. There was the upstairs home for part of the family and the downstairs home, and everybody pitched in. Everybody helped out in order to make their way through these very challenging times in our nation's history. Now, Roz enjoyed a happy childhood. As the youngest, the baby of the family, she was perhaps a bit spoiled. As a youth and teen, she was blessed in being beautiful, both on the inside and the outside. And so, because of this quality, people were drawn to her. Following her graduation from Erasmus High School, Roz briefly attended Hunter College before entering into the workplace. Friends, just a few years ago in 2018, I had the sad privilege of sitting down with Roz and her sons on the occasion of the passing of her husband and their father, Robert Lubell. Today I have the unique privilege of sharing Roz's own words and sentiments with you. You see, on that day back in 2018, I asked her about her beloved Bob, how they met, how they came to be. And so this is the story, in her words, as to how she met her beloved. Roz told me that following his service to our country, Bob Lubell returned home to New York, and on one summer day, Bob decided to meet up with a buddy of his at Brighton Beach. While enjoying the sun and sand, Bob's pal spotted two young ladies he knew from his high school days, and one of those gals was Roz Rosenberg. As Roz told me this story, she went on to describe how she vividly remembered that day on the beach, and that when she was introduced to Bob Lubell, she felt immediately smitten. There was, as she described it, an instant chemistry, and after just a couple of hours together on the beach, Bob got up the nerve to ask Roz out on a date with him for that evening. Roz said yes, and that first date, as Roz recalled, was spent with the two of them strolling through Prospect Park in Brooklyn. It was then that a courtship began, and soon love blossomed. 1 year later, Roz and Bob were engaged, and they married on September 2nd, 1951, in the basement of a small synagogue in Brooklyn. In their 67 years of marriage, 67 years of a dedicated and loving partnership, The two of them were quite the team. Wherever they lived, whether it was in New York or New Jersey or Ohio, home for Bob and Roz, where was ever they were together. They enjoyed many adventures in their years together, especially when it involved traveling. They loved to explore the world and listen to some of the places they visited. They went to Portugal and Spain and France, England, Scotland, Italy, Hungary, Poland, where they made it a point to visit Auschwitz, and Israel, and that's just to name a few. They loved exploring. But with all their adventures, with all their travels, nothing was more important to Roz and Bob than family. Art, Jeff and Paul, you know this better than anyone. As the three of you boys entered into their world, your mom and dad's lives were enriched and became all the more wonderful. In her earliest years as a mom, your mom and your Aunt Claire, Roz's sister, it seems the two of them worked out a special arrangement, and this is really quite brilliant. This is a time as well when we didn't usually have two family incomes. Claire, along with Roz, was also raising 3 sons. And in those days, Claire would go and work outside of the home, and Roz would stay at home and care for not only her 3 boys, but also her 3 nephews, Claire's boys. With one of the sisters working at home and the other working outside of the home, Claire and Roz would split Claire's weekly pay. What a wonderful, clever, and unique opportunity they created. Roz was loved by her brother and sister, and she was blessed to call both Claire and Norm her friends. And throughout their adult lives, the family could always count on Roz and Claire. And perhaps some of you who know what I'm talking about, if you close your eyes, you can even see it. You can think about your mom and your aunt dancing the Kazatsky. Did I say it correctly? The Kazatsky. I know what it looks like, I just didn't know if I said it correctly. But there would be Roz and Claire dancing the Kazatsky on the floor at every family wedding and bar and bat mitzvah celebration. Friends, I had an opportunity yesterday to speak at length with Roz's sister-in-law, Elaine, a woman who considered Roz to not just be a sister-in-law, but really a dear friend and a sister. Elaine is joining us via live stream, and Elaine, we wish you continued good health as you recover through this time. Elaine, you recalled that when everyone was still living in Brooklyn, it felt like the family, everyone were the best of friends. And you shared with me, Elaine, that you and your husband, Fred, initially you had a difficult time getting pregnant, and after the two of you suffered a miscarriage, and then you were once again pregnant, Elaine, your doctor instructed you that you would only be allowed out of the house 1 day per month. 1 day, and that 1 day was, of course, to visit your doctor. Well, your sister-in-law, your friend Roz, turned out to be a godsend for you, Elaine. It was Roz who jumped in and arranged everything for those once-a-month outings. After she dropped her children off at school, Roz would pick you up, Elaine. She would take you to your doctor's appointment, and then she'd bring you back to her home, maybe make a little lunch for you, and then happily welcome any members of the family and all of Elaine's friends over to visit with you, Elaine. Fred and Bob would eventually come home from their day at work, and the whole family would have dinner together. And being that this was your 1 day out, Elaine, 1 day each of those 9 months of the pregnancy, you would try to stay as late as possible at Roz and Bob's home. And Bob would be the one to drive you home, no matter how late it was. Elaine recalled that as the years passed and the children were growing up, she remembered summers, the times when the family would meet at the beach, under the clock, at Reese Park. And these were wonderful times. Elaine recalls that all the cousins, the whole family would have so much fun together, whether in the water or playing cards, just enjoyed being together. These wonderful times made for the greatest memories. Elaine, you shared with me that She was like a sister to you. And so in 2021, a little bit after the passing of your beloved Fred, you and your son Alan went to Cleveland to visit with Roz. You knew that this visit would probably be the last time the two of you would see each other. And Elaine, you and Roz shared a beautiful visit, a tearful farewell. But how grateful you were to her for all she had done for you and been to you over those years. Now, due to Bob's career, the family moved from New York to New Jersey, and it's interesting to note that while the family was living in New Jersey, Roz and Bob saw a need. And so, while living in Pequannock, New Jersey, the Lubell family and a few other families formed their own congregation, their own synagogue. For Roz, her faith and her traditions and her religion were always very important to her. Her love of Judaism also guided Roz into what we refer to as tikkun olam, literally means repairing the world. And in repairing the world, many years ago, whether she was in Brooklyn or New Jersey or even here in Cleveland, Roz remained an active member of ORT, where she happily took on leadership roles. In 1971, Bob accepted a position with Medical Mutual of Ohio, and the Lubell family packed up everything and moved to Cleveland. And when I say they packed up everything, I don't really mean they packed up everything, because the move provided an opportunity for Roz to maybe declutter and throw out some stuff. Now, Jeff, I'm not sure if she threw out anything important to you, but Arthur, who was away at college at this time, he didn't learn until it was much too late that his mom tossed all of his Spider-Man comic books, a collection which included the first 40 issues, a collection which could have sent all of us on a nice vacation together. Paul, apparently you fell victim to this as well, with some of your baseball cards going missing. But for the three of you boys, your mom prioritized, and she saved what she thought was most important, your G.I. Joe action figures, and of course, all those report cards. Once you were grown, your mom decided to go out into the world again, and she created for herself a very meaningful career, a career that was so important to her and that helped so many people. Later in life, she became a school secretary at Onaway School in Shaker Heights. The first 6 years of this career were actually dedicated working in the school administration part of Shaker Heights' school district, and those last 14 years were actually at Onaway School, and she loved this job, and Roz especially loved working with her principal at Onaway, Jean Silek. The two of them worked very well together. And for many years, Roz was the president of the local chapter, a union in Shaker Heights that was set up for the school administrative support staff. Roz was the type of person that if she saw a problem, she was always up to the task of finding a solution and trying to make things better for others. A woman with many talents, she knitted, she crocheted, macrameed, quilted. She's had a pottery studio in her basement. She sold her pottery at art shows with her friend Pam for 15 to 20 years. The most prominent creation she made were those that tied into games. Chessboards and pieces for chess and Chinese checkerboards and Mancala pieces. And Pam and Roz, their studio, known as Halcyon Pottery, they were quite a team together. Her creativity with her quilts, I'm wondering if there are many people in this room and watching right now who are the proud owners of those quilts. These were made with love and great skill and care. Her sons described her to me as the consummate mother. Her boys told me she was always there. She taught you how to play cards. She taught you how to play bridge. And she was the one, when you had a problem or a concern, she was the one that you went to talk to. You found her to be non-judgmental, forgiving, caring, and patient. Your mom had this Victrola she saved from the old days. She saved a lot of Arthur's record collection, many of these songs from the late 50s and early 60s, and some of these were children's favorites as well, like Puff the Magic Dragon.
And Roz, years later, with her grandchildren, she passed these recordings on to the next generation, listening to the songs with her grandbabies. We're going to hear a little bit more about her as a mom and a grandmother, but I will say this, as a grandmother, Roz loved sharing not only her music with her grandkids, but she loved sharing herself with her grandkids. How she adored getting down on the floor with the grandchildren and playing endless games with them. This was her greatest joy. She was so proud of her sons and her grandchildren, and you all should be reminded that if she were to wear a crown, you were the jewels in that crown. Friends, we are reminded by our tradition that words which come from the heart always enter directly to the heart. We have a few speakers who have words in their heart they want to share with us today. And so first, I'd like to call on her son, Paul.
I want to thank the canner. Now my speech won't seem so long. First, I need to do a little housekeeping. Let me thank everyone here and everyone who is watching online for taking time to pay homage to a wonderful woman and share with my family and I a moment to express our grief at our loss. I would also like to extend my loving appreciation to all of my extended family across the country, especially my Aunt Elaine, her children, Alan and Sherry, and my New York brothers, Joel, Marty, and Bobby. Thank you all for your kind thoughts and the family memories you have shared. As many of my family and my mom's friends have expressed, my mother's love and compassion and kindness meant so much to each of you. So my brothers and I would like to express our condolences on your loss as well. I'm positive that this is not going to be easy, but I'm certain that I need to be the one sharing my mother's thoughts. So please bear with me. Personally, I feel a profound loss and am deeply saddened by my mother's passing. It's not just that I lost a mother. I lost a friend, a companion, and a charge. Over the years, through every trial and tribulation of my life, my mother was there to support me and my wishes, whether it was financial, emotional. My mother always tried to come to the rescue. If there was one person that you could talk to about your problems, it was my mother. A great listener, compassionate, understanding, and above all, non-judgmental. Her only regret would be that she couldn't do more for you. My earliest recollections of my mother are just like many happy children. Mom took care of my needs and wants. She was always busy doing something, but always had time for me. If not for me, then for my brothers, my cousins, or my father. She was the caregiver for so many, and she always seemed to have boundless energy and compassion. To me, Mom was the indestructible cornerstone of my life. Once we moved from Brooklyn to New York, out in the sticks, which at the time was New Jersey, I was given a new sense of freedom. Dad went to work, Mom was busy in the house, and she would let me loose on the neighborhood to explore. And as she always did, she supported my every adventure and curiosity. When I came home with frogs and tadpoles, she didn't blink an eye. When I came home with crayfish, she was fascinated. When I came home with a snake, she was less than pleased, but still didn't say no. She just said, keep it away from your father. As most of you know, my mother was an artist. Just about whatever creative thing she put her mind to doing came to fruition. Obviously, this is where my creative side came from. As her youngest and typically always around, I got to share in her talents. Sarah and Jessie also shared in her interests. As I watched her efforts and eventually was allowed to pick a design to make for me, she would make it happen. When I asked for a macrame elephant, she did it. When she knitted and crocheted, I asked for a blanket with black yarn. And apparently that's not very easy. She did it. Not only did she do it once, but after the blanket was stolen in New York when our car was stolen, she made another one. When she opened a pottery studio with her friend Pam, I was always making creative requests for both of them. As a result, my collection of pottery is quite large. Thank you very much, Pam. When she started quilting with Pam and her other friend Betty, I made a request for a denim quilt. Now, She hand-sewed this, and I don't know how you hand-sewed denim, but she met the request with her typical tenacity. Over the years, the quilt became so loved and so worn, and of course, she did it again. She made a second one of the same exact kind. It was always a signature gift of hers that came straight from the heart. I am thankful that so many pieces of her heart exist across the country. Mom and I shared a love of gardening, music, and sports, cooking, nature, and of course, dogs. That commercial where they show the dogs in distress asking for money always teared her up, and I had to change the channel. She loved to watch football and basketball with her children and grandchildren. Indians baseball was, of course, a favorite of hers that she shared with her good friend Ruth. They would commiserate after every game. And along with my father, they also watched soccer and golf. And of course, seeing her children and grandchildren play sports when she could was always a bigger priority. In her final years, we talked a lot about life, love, gossip. You would never have guessed it, but this petite, demure woman loved a dirty joke. With my steady stream of corny and off-color jokes, I would have her laughing hysterical. No topic was ever out of bounds, and my father thought it was crude and bad-mannered, but my mother loved a fart joke or something with sexual innuendo. When I could, I would start the day by tickling her feet, and then the laughs would escalate from there. My success was always measured by the number of times I made coffee come out her nose. In addition to joking around, we listened to a lot of music. She liked a wide variety of music: classical, jazz, show tunes, folk, and of course, rock and roll. Two of her favorites were Frank Sinatra and the Beatles. She always had a thing for old Blue Eyes. On one winter's day, she shared with me a thought that she was the luckiest woman in the world. She was one woman and she had 4 men. Unfortunately for her, the price would be that she would never get a word in edgewise. In caring for her, I came to understand just how proud she was of me and my brothers. I may have taken an unusual path in life, she said, but in the end, she was confident about the man I would become. In her final weeks, she seemed to only have one thing constantly on her mind, and that was me. As she sat silent and failing, she only wanted to make sure that I was going to be okay. This is who she was. I'd like to conclude by expressing a few words to her grandchildren. Sarah, Grandma loved you like a daughter. She was so proud of the woman and the mother that you had become. Talking to you and seeing your family, especially Lydia, always put a smile on her face. Because of her physical issues, she expressed significant regret that she couldn't get down on the floor and play with Lydia. As one might expect, part of her remained a child even at 92. Josh, Zach, and Jesse, I truly hope that you all understand the love that your grandmother had for you. Each of you, in your own way, developed a special relationship with her, not only as children playing with their grandma, but also as adults who loved and revered and cared for their grandmother when necessary. I'm sure she will live in your hearts and your stomachs forever, as Grandma's cheesecake is legendary. Austin and Adam, you both need to understand how proud your grandmother was of your academic and sports or athletic-related successes. She regretted not being able to see you play more than she did. And lastly, to my brothers, I would like to say that we were the lucky ones to be blessed with a mother who seemed to be a wellspring of loving kindness. In many respects, to the family and others whose lives she touched, she was quite saintly. But to us, she was just Mom.
Thank you, Paul. Now I'd like to call on her granddaughter, Sarah.
I realized as I walked in here today that I must be channeling my grandmother, because the first thing I did was stick tissues in my sleeve. My grandmother was one of the strongest person I know. And I'm going to need to call on her for a little strength to get through this. My grandparents had a long and joyous life together. From my view, they were such a wonderful couple because they complemented each other so well. My grandfather, the storyteller, my grandma, the listener. Grandpa enjoyed being the center of attention, while Grandma did not. In fact, she hated it. The only thing she may have disliked more was being patted on the top of her head. Of course, I say that. There was the one exception, which the cantor mentioned. After a few adult beverages at a wedding, she and Claire, inevitably getting down low to dance the Kazatsky, while the rest of the party cheered on. Like many fun things with Grandma that she got into, this usually ended with them rolling on the ground laughing. While Grandma avoided the center of attention, she was the center of our family. Family gatherings often centered around what dish she was making or baking. As Paul mentioned, if the latter was cheesecake, the main course did not matter. Family dinner was a time when she liked to sit back and enjoy her family. Enjoy the impassioned discussion between her sons around the table, the good-natured ribbing thrown between them, the giggling of her grandchildren playing in the den, or the calls from her sons, "Hey, Ma, this dish is better than the last time you made it." She knew how to make someone new part of the family, too. The first time I took the man who would eventually become my husband home to meet my family, I was, of course, excited to introduce him to my grandparents. We had a lovely visit, and as we were leaving, Grandma takes my future husband, Dan, by both cheeks and gives him a big kiss right on the lips. As we drove away, Dan says to me, "Your grandmother just kissed me on the lips. I think I'm going to like that lady." As a kid, I thought my grandma had superpowers. As she and I drove around town, she had the power to shoot out the traffic lights and turn them green. She also seemed to know everything you were doing in the house, no matter where she was. She explained that she had eyes in the back of her head, which helped her keep an eye on the kids. I recently smiled and thought of her as I found myself saying the same thing to my daughter, although she refers to them as my back eyes. As I got older, more of my grandmother's personality became known to me. She was a fiery spirit, and as Paul alluded to, could be quite cheeky. This would show through in her response to teasing from her sons, or the array of hand gestures that she would use to show you exactly what she thought of what you just had to say. When Grandma was getting a little too cheeky for Grandpa's taste, there was a look he would shoot her. I recall one dinner at their house when Pam and Betty and Roland, their friends, were there. It might have been around Grandma and Grandpa's anniversary. I believe it was Roland who asked them what the secret to their long and happy marriage was. Without missing a beat, Grandpa responded, "Sleeping naked." Yep, there was that look from Grandpa. Grandma was an excellent quilter, knitter, seamstress, potter. And as I grew, she taught me these skills as well. I was honored to be included in the quilting nights with her friends, Pam and Betty. There was some quilting that went on those evenings, but it was really just an excuse to spend time together, share stories and jokes. An occasional Manhattan, which again would leave Grandma rolling on the ground laughing. There were the quilt shop trips. It started with lunch at some tea shop they had found, and perusing the local quilt shop to play the color game and help someone pick out fabric for their next project. Sometimes these days would include driving through various small towns looking for a hardware store to find whatever widget or cog someone needed for a project they were working on. Or possibly heading out to the lake just to check on the beach to make sure it was still there. being wrapped in this group of longtime friends really felt like home. I enjoyed the quilting, but my favorite old lady hobby that I picked up from Grandma was the pottery. Staying over at Grandma's for the weekend came with a special treat of joining her and Pam in the basement studio to play clay, as she called it. Grandma, Pam, and I would spend the morning getting covered in clay, listening to car talk, click and clack on the radio, and laughing as we always did. These are truly some of my favorite childhood memories. One of the pieces that they made and sold regularly were the Mustache Mugs. For those of you that have not seen these, bushy eyebrows and nose and a mustache on these coffee mugs. I was always trying to put nostrils on the mugs, which Grandma never seemed to appreciate for some reason. Some of you may not know that Grandpa was not the only man in her life. She would tell you she had a boyfriend too, Sir Sean Connery. One of her favorite movies of his was Finding Forrester, a story about an old author who befriends a young boy in the neighborhood with a lot of potential as a writer. There's a scene she loved at the end of the movie where Connery rides his bicycle through the Bronx while Over the Rainbow plays in the background. Grandma's back with Grandpa now. The clouds are far behind them, and where trouble melt like lemon drops. Although Gramps might have to let her ride bikes with Connery every once in a while. Grandma, of course, has a special spot in my heart and will always be with me. But I will never truly miss her. She's with me in so many ways. In the quilt I wrap tight around me to stay warm in the winter. In the meat platter I use to serve dinner to my family and friends. In the most amazing chocolate cake I've ever had. And every time I hear someone use the word pocketbook for some reason. In worrying about my own family the way that she always did. In wandering through old hardware stores, craft shops, botanical gardens, art museums. In the creativity I see in my daughter. In the words I hear come out of my mouth regularly. And in the laughter of my family. I will never stop telling her about all the happy moments in my life, or seek consoling from her about the sad ones. Grandma, you were a one-of-a-kind lady, my rock and shoulder to cry on, encouragement I needed to achieve, and the example of love for me to strive for. I love you now and forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was just beautiful. Friends, I want to call on Roz's nephew, our last speaker today. Bobby, if you would come forward. I know you have words written by your brother Martin that you want to share with us in this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I start, before I read Martin's, I just wanted to say a few words. Because, we've all heard about the incredible love that my Aunt Roz shared with so many people. I don't think you can really understand it without knowing a little about her childhood and where she came from. And you heard a little from the rabbi about growing up in this extended family. But, Roz's father died when she was a young teenager. And her mother really never recovered. But her aunt Gus and our Aunt Gus, who was my grandmother's sister, was really a force of love in her life, who I think imparted so much on Roz and was something of an inspiration to that showed her how important other people are besides your mother and father. And I grew up with two mothers essentially, but I'm going to read Marty's talk. So bear with me because I'm Bobby, but this is Martin. I'm Martin Minsky, the second son of Roz's sister Claire. Roz and Bob Lubell were my aunt and uncle, and I write to share with you the grief at Roz's passing and to say how much her presence in my life meant to me. It's well known within our extended family that Roz and Bob, who lived nearby, played an outsized role in my upbringing and that of my brothers. When I learned to catch and throw a baseball, it was Bob at the other side of the transaction. As kids, we played cards all the time. It was Roz who taught us how to play and fostered healthy competition. Some of my happiest childhood memories are centered on a rollicking game of crazy gin at the Lubell's kitchen table. To this day, I'm an athlete and a card player. I know much of that satisfaction that I get from my pastimes to the early lessons imparted by Roz and Bob. If that were all I had to say, it would be enough to give thanks, but there's many, many more, so much more. Although we lived a few steps away from the Lubells and saw them daily, when we went off to 3rd Avenue to visit our grandmother, Roz's mother Anna, Arthur, Jeff, and Paul were already there waiting to play a game of gin rummy or casino, or to traipse through our make-believe Sherwood Forest along the New York City shoreline. When we went to the beach at Reese Park, something we did often during the summer, it was as one big happy family. So too were the annual fall picnics in Harriman State Park. And often, because my own mother was off at work, upon returning home from school for lunch, it was Roz's kitchen I went to. She was the one with whom I shared my successes and disappointments, the trusted confidant that every boy needs. Roz was my surrogate mother, day after day, week after week, year in and year out. Her children, Arthur, Paul, and Jeff, were our cousins, but Roz's warmth, sincerity, and social grace did not let that stop with labels. She engendered trust and friendship among us, a sense of togetherness that endures to this day. Time and distance have separated us, so too have fervent political opinions. But the brotherly feelings I share with Arthur and his brothers rise above it all. They have endured through the decades, and despite the divisions which roil our political landscape, this bond is due in great measure to the gentle humanity of my Aunt Roz. I'm grateful for her to this as only a son can be. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Martin and Bobby. Thank you for that. Friends, before we conclude our service today, I want to let you know just a couple brief announcements to share. If anyone is wishing to make a contribution in memory of Roz, the family has asked that you might consider the American Cancer Society. Roz was a survivor of breast cancer, and a contribution to this organization would mean a great deal to her. There will be a Shiva today and also tomorrow. Shiva will be at the residence at 2127 Halcyon, following the service today until 5 p.m., and then again tomorrow from 1 until 4 p.m. At this time, those of you who are able, I invite you to please rise for the El Mole Rachamim. El Mole Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamse Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfech Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Otorim Kezochar Arakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Rivka Bat Yosef V'chana, שהלכה לעולמה בגן עדן תחי מנוחתה. אהנה ברחמים אסיריך בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותצרור בצרור חיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. O merciful God who dwells on high, who is full of compassion, grant perfect rest beneath the shelter of your divine presence among the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament. To our dear departed Roslyn, Roz Lubell. To Roz, who has gone to her eternal home, may her soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life, and grant that her memory inspire us to noble and consecrated living. And to this we say, Amen. We now turn to the words of the mourner's Kaddish, and I invite you to recite these words with me as we say together. Yizkadal v'yizkadash shemei Rabbah, b'alma divra chirusei v'yamlich malchusei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agolav v'zaman kariv v'yamru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekurasha barichu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran b'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shalom Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen. We pray that God, who makes peace in a high place, will send peace and comfort to you, the mourners, to Israel, and to all humankind. And to this we say, Amen. Friends, Boachem l'shalom, tzeitchem l'shalom. As you have come here in peace, may you go forth today in peace. Thank you.
Let's go.